Welcome back, everybody. This episode is going to be a continuation on the work that I'm doing on the Rolls-Royce Merlin fenders, and I'm hoping by the end of it they're going to be done and out of the way so I can just get the plumbing done on the engine. But one thing that I've omitted for the episode and for the kind of the fender series, if you want to call it, is the prep work. You might have seen in the past couple episodes and some of the social media posts that these have gone from bare metal to green primer with speckles, and at one point they were gray and then they were white, and now they're painted. So what I've done is I've gone through all the bodywork process. You might remember that they were, I bought a trailer for this project and ended up stripping it down, using some of the parts and scrapping most of it. I wanted to keep these because they are way better and way heavier than what you'd buy new. So they were sandblasted, brought down to bare metal, and then primed and slowly built back up until we got where we're at here. The top coat, I've picked a semi-gloss polyurethane finish on it, so it's very durable and robust, but I didn't want to go with gloss because it would take away, or I feel it could have taken away a bit from the engine. So I wanted your eyes to still be drawn to the engine, even though this should look nice when it's done. Surprise that I've had recently is I'd kept the trim panels from the original fenders, and I had a quick look at them. They're oxidized, but they look to be in fairly decent shape. But now that I've brought them out and had a better look, I started to clean them and polish them. And what I found is that there's a lot of little nicks and scratches that didn't show through the oxidization. And it's not something that I want on these fenders because I put a lot of care into it. So I'm going to scrap these and I'm going to make our own fender covers. I'm going to stick with aluminum, and I really don't want to take the easy road and go with checker plate. I think that's too common and maybe looks a little bit too industrial for what we're doing here. So I'm going to use an aluminum sheet of the same size as the original one. I plan on embossing it, so we'll see how that goes, but I'll leave it bare. And I'm going to create a little bit of a deviation to the finish on it that allows me to rivet in smaller panels to give it a bit of contrast. Again, I don't want it to take too much away from the engine itself, but I do want it to look good and reflect well on Typhoon Legacy. So I started embossing. I think some of you might have seen this one. I did a social media post where I did a trial piece on aluminum of the Rolls-Royce logo. This is done with the bead roller by hand. I don't know how well that shows up. But that was my test piece, and it turned out pretty well. I'm definitely not an ace at the bead rolling. I've seen some guys that can do an amazing job. I struggle a little bit with the connections of two lines when I do it. I'll show you that later. But the plan was that the overall rock guard or fender cover that's going to go on this is going to be aluminum, and I'm going to inset a Rolls-Royce logo done in copper into that and rivet it on with copper rivets. So you still get a bit of contrast, you get a really nice flashy look to it, and it represents the engine well as well. The one thing is, with those little connections there, I really wasn't happy with the way that these turned out. They look good from a couple feet away, but I'm a little bit picky, and when you get really close into those connections, because of the thickness of this material, it's really hard to get them to close up tight without any kind of deformation in there. So I'm going to try another thing. So to produce the exact same thing, I'm going to build a press form and press these out, and hopefully they'll come out just the way that I want them. So I'm going to put those aside for now. I'm going to put these aside for now because other items that need to be done are standoffs for the inner fenders that we did last time, just to keep them away from the frame from vibrating as the engine runs, as well as finishing the inner fenders themselves. So let's get to that. In the last episode, I fit the inner fenders, which bolt directly to the fenders themselves, but there's a little bit of a gap between the inner fender when fitted to the fenders and the frame here, just down in this area here. It's only about a ½ inch, and we do need to keep a gap up there for the bolts that attach the tongue, just up towards the front. You can't really see. But my concern is that with this panel being on there and not supported along the bottom at all, when the engine's running, it's going to flap around, and I don't want the sound of tapping metal or moving metal. So I'm going to create some little standoffs that bolt into the frame and just hold that inner fender in place to keep it from moving. So that'll be our first task for the day. You can see that I've put one of the standoffs just in between the inner fender and the frame of the trailer itself. And although it's not situated exactly the way it will be on install, you can see that it pushes the inner fender away from the frame of the trailer. So that is by design. It's going to be back about 1/8 of an inch, but essentially that's because if you remember back to some of the earlier videos when I told you what we're doing with the trailer, it's got to be shippable. And to do that, we have to take the tongue off. So the tongue is actually going to be bolted on using U-bolts, 3 U-bolts on it, and they need clearance to get between that inner fender and the frame. So to facilitate the installation of these guys and to make sure that our gap is proper here and consistent all the way along, I'm going to joggle that inner fender sheet so that it provides clearance. When I refer to joggling, I'm talking about creating a formed indent into either a leg of a bend or a flat plate that a joining structure can nest into without having to machine a relief or anything like that. The easiest way that I've always found to do that is to create these joggling plates. This one's a little worse for wear, but you can see I've got several from different projects. You want to make sure that you've got nice round edges on it and you've deburred it really well, because you're going to put this into typically a vise or a press, and you don't want it to dig in and leave stress risers in your good part. This is just a quick demo, so I'm not going to do too much more cleanup on this one, the old piece here. But essentially what happens is you insert it. You've got to cut this area here, deburr it really well. An important design feature when you're doing this is to make sure that you've got one leg, for a channel anyway, that you've got one leg shorter than the other, and that's to allow the long leg to extend beyond the top and help with the sandwiching around the radius. So you put that in there like that, and then you compress these down and it'll joggle it. So you might notice that the web of this particular channel section has also bowed out here. You'll find that with any joggle placement on a bend, either an angle or a channel like this. And often what I'll do is I'll take a wooden or a plastic punch and I'll carefully tap that in while everything is under load here, and it'll help shrink the material in there and make sure that we have a nice structural member when it's done. And you can see there that now we've got a joggle in place that is going to be allow for a material thickness smaller than this over the structure, and we could actually sandwich that up against another flat member without any kind of issue. Now with that said, this one I made years ago. I don't even remember what I did it for, but it's absolutely ridiculous. It's 1/4 inch material, and that's what we're going to be doing today. But I did a test piece on the scraps from the inner fender, and basically I did the exact same thing that I just showed you on a thicker scale, really quick and crude in the hydraulic press, and this is what I ended up with. So first of all, it's not square, didn't even bother taking the time for that, but I wanted to see the kind of damage I'd be doing to the material itself. What I found was that these corners, the top corners, created quite a bit of pressure or stress points on the material, both sides. So if I was going to go with this, which I am, I'd want to make a joggling plate like this that has a bit of a taper to it to alleviate that kind of stress in the material. I've got a scrap aluminum plate in here. I've done a little bit of roughing work on it. It's not going to be perfectly square or any of that good stuff, but it doesn't need to be for this. In fact, usually when I make these kind of joggling tools, I just use the bandsaw and a piece of sheet metal that's typically from 40 to 63 thou. In this case, we're at a 1/4 inch. We're doing a pretty big joggle, and I want to put a taper on it so it doesn't deform the material too much. So I'm going to go ahead and mill out a 1/2 inch slot, and I'm going to have to build a left and a right. So basically I've got a blank here big enough that I can cut 2 out of, and we'll just start hogging it down from there. Now we've got 2 plates cut. You can see this one's got a curve on it. Again, they're scraps from the station plate material that was cut for the monocoque section, so it's not going to affect this at all. We've now got 2 roughly similar items, and the next step will be to cut a taper on them. Now I've switched over to a small face mill. I've clamped both plates end to end on the milling bed, so I've got a true left and right, and I've put a 1/4 inch shim under one leg to give a milled taper using that face mill. Now it's not a very accurate way of cutting a taper, obviously, but it's far more accurate than what would normally happen for a just one of these little vise juggling fixtures. That cut a pretty quick taper on the one leg for us. I'll take these off now and just sand and round some corners off, and then we'll get to the next step. The intent here with the taper that we've machined on the back is that this will now fit on here and alleviate any kind of pressure or the excessive pressure that was on that area. So we've got a nice radius on here. The material should bend around that, and at the end result it should have a nice taper without a bulge or any kind of stress risers on the material there. And it's not for stress in this case, it is for cosmetics. So you can see that that top one will wrap around, and it tapers to about 40 or 50 thousandths of an inch, which I think will be just fine. So we've got a left and a right, and I'm going to go ahead now that these are made, and I'm going to try them out in the press to see if it gives us the desired result, and then we'll move on to the inner fenders themselves. So I've got a little 20-ton hydraulic press, and it's better suited for this given the fact we're using a 1/4 inch thick juggling tool and 1/8 inch thick plate. So I've got some steel plates down here. We'll put our assembly in. Basically pretend this was the vise for our smaller demonstration, and make sure the plates line up nicely. Sandwich that with another plate. There we go. And give it a bit of pressure. That's 10 tons. And I think that looks pretty good, so I'll relieve the pressure and pull the top plate. See how our little fixture worked. Well, it's crooked. So I had some shift there, so I'll have to make sure that I line it up and pay attention to that. We've got a longer joggle here because I went from about a 1/4 inch of a gap to a 1/2 inch milled slot on that one, which is nicer, smoother transition. I see a bit of marking, so I might file those edges smoother and put some tape on them. But all in all, that's a nice tapered transition. It's a nice tapered transition from here to the bottom. I'll just make sure that we actually have a 1/4 inch of a gap there. There's approximately 1/8 of an inch on there, and we've got 3/8 U-bolts that are going in for clearance. So we'll just measure this up and see how it goes, and then we'll polish these up, make them pretty, and do the fenders themselves. When I sanded that radius down, I used 50 grit paper, and that's why I left a mark. So now that it looks like everything's going to work out, I've taken a fine grit non-woven abrasive disc, and I polished that up. And on the surfaces that will be pressed against the material, I've also put a piece of masking tape just to help prevent any kind of marring on our workpiece. Excellent, much nicer finish there, just a nice straight bend, and my marking helped keep it perpendicular to the bottom surface. So flip this guy around and do the next one. With these standoffs, I drilled them out to nominal to make sure everything stayed concentric, and the side effect of that is trying to pick up the center in relation to the flat spot on it that supports the inner fender. So what I did is I spun up this bushing really quickly that'll allow me to drill this number 7 drill hole, which is the tap drill size for a 1/4-20 bolt, which is what these are going to be. So it gives me a pilot for that. It allows the drill to sit in there, and it'll seat nicely inside our standoff. So another thing I've had to do is, because the brake drum is somewhat in the way, I've taken an angle drill and I've fit it with a adjustable close quarters chuck here to allow me to use that number 7 drill bit. So I've positioned the standoff where it's going to live. The flat of the standoff is up against the bottom of the inner fender, and my drill bushing is right here. I just need that center location marked properly. With the center located, I'm going to use my other angle drill here, which is a desuder, I might add, and desuder tools were used quite extensively in the production of Typhoons originally. That aside, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a number 30 pilot through here, and then I'll drill it up with the other angle drill again to that number 7 before I tap it. Now with this drilled out to a number 7, it's a little bit too tight to get in there with all my tooling right now and get enough pressure on it to tap it properly. So before I destroy the hole, I'm going to go ahead and I'll drill all of the other holes along here, and then the fender can be removed and it'll give me more room to play and get these in properly. These are cheeky little holes to tap, and I've uncovered a couple issues, all made easier now that the holes are in the correct location. I've been able to pull the fender. However, drill size is a bit of an issue in confined spaces, because for a 1/4-20, the number 7 pilot limits me from using extension drill bits, because I don't have a number 7 extension drill bit on hand that'll fit some of these locations. Same with the 1/4-28 threaded shank drill bits. I was basically stuck with jobbers. And then the other issue was also the tap. It was a junky 1/4-20 carbon steel tap, so trying to get that to bite in less than ideal circumstances was not helping. So what I've done, and it's probably for the best anyway, is I'm going to switch the bolts over to 1/4-28. I've drilled these up to, I think it's number 3 that I put in here, which is the tap drill size for the 1/4-28, and I'll use a proper high-speed steel tap with fine thread, and the fine thread will also give it more surface area to bite into, and essentially, well, it will be stronger than a coarse thread. The only issue I have now is that in this specific position, I still can't get a tap handle, but with a good quality tap and some dead reckoning, I've been successful in getting these to bite and stay square. Here we go. I'll deburr that edge and fit the standoffs and be done with this side. So I'll move over and do the exact same thing on the other side. So I've pulled the 1/4-20 bolt out. Here's our standoff. They go in come saw. As you can see, the flat side here, I hope. That's where the inner fender is going to sit on. And then I've just built it up. I've got our clamping washer, a standard washer, and a lock washer in there. With 1/4-28, we've got lots of thread grabbing in there. And I'll just go along and put these in place loosely so the inner fender can sit down on them, and then I'll tighten them up once everything is said and done. Thank you all very much for your patience with these episodes. I've gotten completely carried away with the fenders and the detail I've gone into with them, and that's carried over into the episode. So I'm going to cut this one now, make it into a several part series of what I've done here and give you the detail on how I do these processes, and that way I can get some content out to you guys. So I hope that's a win-win for everybody. Please do check out our paid channel if you can and support us. Every penny goes towards the airworthy rebuild of Hawker Typhoon JP843, and there's also forums on there. The forums contain information and stuff that you won't find anywhere else, and an opportunity to chat with myself, other members, and like-minded people within the community. So please check it out if you can. It's only a couple bucks a month, and it supports the airworthy rebuild of Hawker Typhoon JP843. Take care, guys. Until next time. Cheers.